Hey dudes, are you interested in the Canon R5's ISO, dynamic range and codec performance? Then this video may be for you. But not to waste your time, if you're looking for a flashy, edited entertainment video, this is not it. The scope of this video is a straightforward technical test that I performed for a commercial job. It's part of my normal professional workflow, and it's about gaining a better understanding of how the R5 works in all modes in controlled lighting conditions before shooting the production. If you're into that sort of thing, then this video is for you. This is a long video, so you may want to grab a drink and something to eat, because I've tested every codec frame rate and ISO combination except for the 100p. The test was conducted in a controlled environment to eliminate any outside elements that would potentially skew the results. For full transparency, all the codecs were shot in Canon Log Rec 2020 and H.265 compression unless in RAW, but the RAW Canon files have been post-processed with Canon Log, not Canon Log 2, to match the rest of the clips in the test pool. The camera settings for all the test clips will be clearly marked on the slate on the left of the screen. Each test runs for approximately 10 seconds so that you have time to make an assessment for yourself. I will present my conclusions if you're interested at the end of the video. So next, before the results play, there will be a short explainer defining the methodology behind the test and why you see what you see in the frame. I would recommend to watch the short explainer to get the most out of the test footage. And with that, let's get started. The three things that we're constantly changing are frame rate, the ISO, and the codec. So they're the three things that when you're watching this test, you need to pay attention to over here in this box. Now, all of the shots have been done at 5600K, all at T1.4, and all of the codec and resolutions have been done. There is a couple of things to note in this shot. The first are the way that it's lit. The foreground, which is this plant here, has been kept at a nominal exposure. It does not change throughout the test, and neither does the Venetian blinds over here. So the striping that you're seeing in the background, those two exposure levels are set. As I change the ISO, what I'm actually looking for is the change in dynamic range and latitude of the actual shot. So how is the contrast ratio being affected between our foreground here and our background over here? We have a purposefully overexposed area right here in the frame. This area back here is a true black. This area is a true black down here. I have included a small lens flare up here, but mainly what I'm looking at when I'm changing these values throughout this test is not only the exposure, latitude, contrast ratio, is how much the actual ISO is sliding up and down this exposure scale from where exposure is set here, which is, on this area here, and then how much under and over I'm actually getting and how much is actually being retained. And if these over and under values are actually expanding as the ISO goes up and down that scale. And the next thing we're looking for is obviously how does the noise play well with the ISO setting in each of the frame rate settings and the codec settings. How do they play together? And is there any problems? Is it making the shot look gross, or is it still usable? And finally, all of the clips have exactly the same Canon Rec 2020 to 709 LUT with no exposure compensation applied, as it's imperative to be able to see how the ISO changes and how the image appears between the different settings.
anticipation, you have little patience. Hopefully we'll see this through. Sparks at night, thunder, roll another number. The guys are looking out for you. Everybody's got something to say. Everybody's got something to say. No communication, lost in translation. The joker got his hands to you. Creeping in your back door, knocking on your window. Hopefully my love shines through. Everybody's got something to say. Everybody's got something to say. But I can see the light in every ounce of you. I can see the light in everything we do. I can see the light in every open door. I can see the light I'm waiting for. Neon lights are blinking, the slip between is sinking. A phoenix tangled up in blue. Creeping in your back door, knocking on your window. Hopefully my love shines through. Everybody's got something to say. Everybody's got something to say. But I can see the light in every ounce of you. I can see the light in everything we do. I can see the light in every open door. I can see the light I'm waiting for. I can see the light in every ounce of you. I can see the light in everything we do. I can see the light in every open door. I can see the light I'm waiting for. I think we found something great. Tell me that you feel the same. Never be afraid. I'll be there to hold you. So if you're gonna run drum, I've got your beat. We'll make our own path through whatever comes. I'll be your rock when the going's tough, because there's no love like our love. There's so much still to explore. 100 years, then 100 more. If we're rich or poor, I'll be there to hold you. So if you're gonna run, then run with me. If you got a drum, I've got your beat. We'll make our own path through whatever comes. I'll be your rock when the going's tough, because there's no love like our love. Oh, and I know that we'll find days harder than these. Oh, but I swear I'll keep you safe, right here with me. So if you're gonna run, then run with me. If you got a drum, I've got your beat. We'll make our own path through whatever comes. I'll be your rock when the going's tough, because there's no love like our love.
You're always falling asleep late in the night when I think you're listening to me. And I've told you when you're beside me, feels unfamiliar, feels like strangers in the sheets. Well, I know you, at least I did once. I keep waking up till you're gone. Is it just me, or do you feel something missing? Feel something missing. If I'm honest, like always have been, I'm loving nobody, I'm not sleeping with him, but you're looking at me like I did. You're seeing right through me, you're not listening again. And you're saying the tables have turned. Start living from the lessons you've learned. I'm not asking for preaching. You feel
you see the whole world shaking, and you feel your heart is breaking. Take my hand, no hesitating. Oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh. When you're just so tired of trying, all alone you feel like hiding. Together we'll keep fighting. Oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh. There's no stopping us. Hold on, we're gonna make it. We're gonna make it. Don't stop now. Hold on, we're gonna make it. We're gonna mountains too high we can climb it. Feel this, we'll take in the moment. There's no stopping us. Hold on, we're gonna make it. We're gonna make it. Can you see the sun is shining like a new hope? Feel it rising, coming over the horizon. Oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh. There's no stopping us. Hold on, we're gonna make it. We're gonna make it. Don't stop now. Hold on, we're gonna make it. We're gonna mountains too high we can climb it. Feel this, we'll take in the moment. There's no stopping us. Hold on, we're gonna make it. We're gonna make it. Don't you give up, don't you give up on me. Don't you give up, don't you give up now. Don't you give up, don't you give up on me. Don't you give up, don't you give up now. Don't you give up, don't you give up on me. Don't you give up, don't you give up now. Don't you give up, don't you give up on me. Don't you give up, don't you give up now. There's no stopping us. Hold on, we're gonna make it. We're gonna make it. Don't stop now. Hold on, we're gonna make it. We're gonna mountains too high we can climb it. Feel this, we'll take in the moment. There's no stopping us. Hold on, we're gonna make it. We're gonna make it. Don't you give up, don't you give up on me. Don't you give up, don't you give up now. Don't you give up, don't you give up on me. Don't you give up, don't you give up now. Don't you give up, don't you give up on me. Don't you give up, don't you give up now. Don't you give up, don't you give up on me. Don't you give up, don't you give up.
So what are the
now.
conclusions I can draw from performing this test? Well, the Canon R5 video performance is exceptional under all ISO settings. None of the tests that you have just watched use in-camera noise reduction, and no noise reduction has been applied in post. These tests show that the camera produces very, very little noise in any setting, and when pushed into a high contrast scenario as you've just watched, only the 25,600 ISO is questionable for use. In saying that, the 25,600 ISO would be recoverable if you were to use something like Neat Video to clean up the digital noise and then apply a film grain over the top. This though would have to definitely be a pre-planned look for a production. The simple way to look at it is like this. The 25,000 ISO is not unusable if you pay attention to how you're lighting it. And this statement rings true no matter the codec or frame rate used. At all other ISO settings, the digital noise is very pleasing. It's almost filmic. The sweet spot from my tests appears to be either 1600 ISO or 3200 ISO. This is where my test saw the widest latitude and usable dynamic range. There is also minimal image degradation all the way up to 12,800 ISO. Even when testing the ISO in the IPB line skip compress modes, the R5 doesn't suffer from banding, color shifts, macro blocking, or loss of detail that can be caused from digital noise. Below 1600 ISO, the presence of any digital noise is indistinguishable. and the image, if anything, is almost too clean. Below 1600 ISO, there appears to be less usable dynamic range, but this would never stop you from getting a shot exposed. In a nutshell, at any ISO setting, with the right control, the R5 delivers excellent results. With ample exposure, the digital noise is very pleasing at any ISO except 25,600. Yet I still believe that you would be able to use this under the right circumstances. And look, I'm not talking about a documentary where just cranking the ISO would be your only option to get a shot, because you could do that in a pinch, yes. I mean, this camera is no low light slouch. The test results prove that. The raw footage, as all raw video footage does, has a tiny little bit more noise at higher ISOs than, say, the H.265 10-bit MP4 files, but it isn't anything to worry about. It's usable at 12,800 ISO, but it will require a little bit of noise reduction. And it's worth using the raw because it has more dynamic range in the highlights. It has cleaner blacks and has more flexibility in post. But if you need high ISOs to get your shot, then any of the compressed formats will yield cleaner blacks with less effort. And I think that's really what it's about here. How much effort do you want to put into post? So how you use the ISO to codec frame rate combination will affect your cinematography outcome, but that's no different no matter what digital camera you use, whether it's the R5 or the A7S III. Another way to put this is, what you gain from the 8K RAW in C-Log 2 far outweighs a tiny bit of noise at high ISO values. But if the RAW files are too big for your workflow, rest assured that any of the compressed formats the camera offers will yield exceptional results.